Moving into the next topic, which is a recovery panel, stories of hope, inspiration, and recovery is possible, what every carer needs to hear. I'm going to hand over to Nikki again, who's going to introduce and moderate the next panel discussion for us. Thank you very much again, Nikki.
What a great session that was, and I know by seeing all those questions coming in on the chat how valuable it was to so many people. Wonderful to see you here, Bronwyn and Shannon and Rod. I think, Rod, we haven't got your video on. We're just seeing your lovely face and your mugshot there. There you are with Sydney behind you. Fabulous. So it is my huge pleasure actually to be moderating this final session of the day. It is all about hope. It is all about an inspirational representation of hope in the people that we have here on the panel today. And I think that that's been coming through to us all with what we've been watching from both the clinicians and those with lived experience. Everybody is telling us that eating disorders are treatable and that recovery is possible. We heard that from Lucine, her final message, in that wonderful session on the T's. I loved that Lucine's final message was that recovery is possible at any stage. No matter the age of the individual or length or severity of the illness, there's always hope for recovery, and that's what we heard from Lucine. In fact, F.E.A.S.T's very first principle is that eating disorders are biologically based mental illnesses fully treatable with a combination of nutritional, medical and therapeutic support. That's why we're here. Full and lasting recovery is possible. Before I introduce each of these fabulous people who are going to speak to you from their own personal point of view about recovery and what it means to them, I want to acknowledge that unlike most illnesses, in fact, there isn't a clearly stated, universally agreed, accepted medical criteria that defines recovery from an eating disorder. And in fact, I would say, and from what I've heard, dipping into the AED ANZ ICE conference that's going on at the moment, it's been a prominent topic in the last few days. Clinicians generally agree it's a topic of debate and discussion still. But F.E.A.S.T are very happy, in fact, to define it not in clinical measurable terms, but in something that is qualitative and something that parents and families are so well qualified to determine. Recovery is reached on a return to a state, not a weight. It's a state where the individual is living a life free of eating disordered thoughts and behaviours, where a complete remission of symptoms has taken place and the individual is living their best life, a healthy, normal life where their relationship with friends and the activities that they used to enjoy before they became unwell, they're eating all the foods that they used to be able to. That is what is present for that individual and the experience of the family and friends of that individual. We're talking about full medical, emotional and cognitive health. So we've gathered together a group of people to provide you with their crucial message that recovery is possible. We have a mum, Bronwyn Eldridge, who has supported her daughter in recovery. We have Shannon Calvert. Some of you will have seen her if you were at the session this morning in discussion with Dr. Gardiani, who is a woman who has recovered from a long-standing eating disorder, and Dr. Rod McClymont, who is a paediatrician who actually has years of experience not only treating children and adolescents, but also adults in recovery from eating disorders. We did have 4 people on in the program, and up until less than 12 hours ago, there was another panellist, a young man who has recovered from an eating disorder and was keen to come along and share his story with you all. And unfortunately, Mitch has had to pull out due to the health of a family member, so he has sent his apologies. We have Shannon and Bronwyn and Rod, who are going to share stories of inspiration and hope with you. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Bronwyn to the group. Sorry about that. Bronwyn to you all and hand over to you, Bronwyn.
Thank you, Nikki. Just going to get this working. There we go. So, as you heard, I'm Bronwyn. I'm the mother of a now 23-year-old daughter who was diagnosed with restrictive anorexia in June of 2010. We've been on a 10-year journey, and my daughter's come from a child who was critically unwell to someone who is embracing life and starting to thrive. Within 3 weeks of her diagnosis, she was hospitalised for medical stabilisation. It was the first of many over the first year of her illness. In her first year of illness, she spent 9 months in hospital for medical stabilisation. She was unable to eat at home. She struggled to eat in hospital. She was frequently nasogastric fed. She also started self-harm, and there was several suicide attempts. She withdrew further and further from her life. After a year, I was starting to lose hope that anything would change. She gained 40 kilograms via her hospitalisations, and she'd lost all but 2 of those. My daughter was convinced she couldn't get better. Her mental health, if anything, was even worse. The only thing she showed any interest in at the time were her dogs and photography. We often talked about getting a dog, a puppy, as something outside of her eating disorder. We already had 2 dogs. Around 6 months later, we did get a puppy. Around that time, our older dog also became seriously ill. My daughter's eating disorder was very strong, but my real daughter, that small part that was still there, wanted to be home with the puppy and the older dog. She made a deal with her eating disorder that she would parent the puppy, and she promised the older dog that she wouldn't leave her again. In hindsight, this tiny change was the start of her fighting back. She came home from hospital the same day the puppy arrived. She'd just spent another 8 weeks in hospital. Her stay had been extended because of her mental health state. And through that prolonged hospitalisation, she got back to her pre-eating disorder weight. Every day at home was a struggle, but she started to gain weight slowly at home. We spent 8 hours a day feeding. She had suicidal thoughts most days. There was almost daily self-harm. And she required 24 hours a day supervision to try and reduce this. She still had little interest in any other activities. She was too unwell for school, but she really doted on that puppy. Over the course of the next year, she gained another 10 kilograms in weight, but there was still no improvement in her mental health. When our older dog died, things deteriorated rapidly and she was readmitted to hospital for medical stabilisation yet again. Once again, we went back to working on weight gain. Meals were even more of a struggle. She required full meal supervision. She was unable to be responsible for eating or initiating eating. But as time moved on, she could go back to full-time schooling, and after another 18 months of very slow but consistent gain, her depression finally started to improve. She started to socialise more, and she stopped self-harming. By the time we got to 2014, she was into her last year of school. She wanted to attend university and realised that this required taking some responsibility for eating. Learning to feed herself again led to further weight loss, and she was nearly hospitalised. But it took some months to stabilise. I had many conversations with her team about taking charge again, but eventually she managed to do things herself. So in 2015, she started at university. She was now able to work at trying to get better at herself. She started to take responsibility for her care. She started to attend medical appointments herself. She started to see the psychiatrist herself. She voluntarily increased her food variety. She struggled to regain the weight she'd lost, but she really was trying to keep things going on an even keel herself. The highlight for me of that year was when she expressed that she no longer wished to die. Over the next few years, she coped well with university. She slowly started to expand her social circles wider. She was maturing, she caught up with her peers. Her food variety continued to increase. There was less and less foods off limits, and she started to slowly gain weight on her own. She moved on to postgraduate study, and more often than not, she was happy. Last year, she lived away from home. For the first time, she was living in a share house. She was enjoying that independence. So we're now at 2020, and it's still a work in progress. After 10 years, she will graduate from postgraduate study this year. She continues to gain weight slowly. She reports that she still has eating disorder thoughts, but she finds them much easier to push aside. Kobe is still a very important part of her life. She credits him with her recovery to date. They have a very strong bond. Along the way, I learned that food and nutrition are the foundation for recovery, but so much more is required. For recovery, she needed to be able to do some of the work herself, and I had to hold her in a safe place until she could start fighting herself. I also found that when things weren't working, I had to look at things from different angles, had to work at building a life from the ground up for her. And each step backwards was just a detour to learn from and to find a new way forward. I also learned the value of very good mental health support. As she aged, I needed to change my caring style. I needed to allow her more independence, but at the same time, I had to be there for supporting her. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronwyn. It's an inspirational story and wonderful images of that gorgeous puppy. Really, really wonderful. I need to say before I bring Rod on that I misstated that this was the last session of the day. It isn't. There are a couple more recorded sessions and then a social time. So this isn't. Please do refer to your programs. This is not the last session. So introducing you to Rod McClymont.
Hello, everybody hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Rod. Yep.
Great. Look, it's been an incredible day today. I've watched a lot of it, and I've gained quite a bit myself, but it's also helped me get an idea of what things I think we need to cover right now. I'll just bring up, if I can, now I just need to bring in the right thing. Share screen.
Can I help with something, Rod?
Yep. How's that? Everybody see the slides there? Is that correct?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I suppose there are three key things which I think are going to be important for this with the recovery from my perspective. Firstly, it's reiterating some of the nutrition stuff that was very capably handled by Deborah Katzman and others today. I just want to briefly just show you an example of a chart where who started off with a weight that was, for their height, that was above average. It was normal for them. And just to reiterate the importance of getting back to a nutritional state where you're going to recover, it's not just a matter of getting back to that 50th centile or whatever. And that's why you as a parent need to be able to be proactive in saying, well, hang on. So this is just briefly, you can see that this young person, that they were up here on the 90th centile. It doesn't matter what it was, but they were, that was normal for them. At some stage, they started losing weight and it wasn't picked up initially. And then the parents noticed, there's a bit of a worry. So they actually got some measurements. I became involved here. And interestingly, with this person, they did very well with just family-based treatment, and they were very keen to just see, well, let's see how I go when I just get back to average weight for height. And the interesting thing, we stayed there for a little bit, but things were not working. And although it doesn't not on this one, we continued back on to where they should have been, and they've made an excellent recovery. So don't let people sort of get, saying, look, no, that's too high, or no, this is the right one. You need to, your kid. The next thing I'd like to say just briefly is about treatment, not getting caught up as was said very well by in the previous session on chronological age. You need to realise that people function at different ages. So, for example, a 16-year-old person maybe, while they're caught up with their eating disorder, be effectively, functionally like a younger child, even though they might be actually, a bright kid who's sort of above average in their other performance in the past. Where they are is where you need to treat them, and so it's, I believe, very much in tailoring the treatment to the stage of the kid rather than the age. And the final thing, which I think is very important, is that this is a chronic illness. You can get good recovery, but the underlying predisposition that allowed a person to develop an eating disorder is still there, and so you need to have strategies in there to sort of keep an eye on things and not let anybody say, well, everything's fine now. And I think Bronwyn, her story about her daughter illustrated that beautifully, that going into university but still keeping in touch with people and continuing that process going. And finally, I think the best definition I've heard in terms of what recovery is from a point of view of a parent is, as June Alexander puts it in her book, My Kid Is Back. That's what it is. When your kid's back, you're going to know there. And if they're not back, well, there's work to be done regardless of what anybody else says to you. So that's all I have to say, but any questions when we're at the end, that'll be great.
Muted. Sorry, chatting away. Sorry about that. Thank you, Rod. Fantastic points. Absolutely great. And we have got questions coming in, but we're going to answer those at the end, and I'm going to hand over to you, Shannon. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Bronwyn, thank you so much for your presentation, for being vulnerable and sharing your story with your daughter. Rod, as always, thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge those with lived and living experience that are here today. And thank you so much to F.E.A.S.T for this opportunity to, I like to say, talk with you again, not so much present to you. For the very purpose of wanting to speak with you, I haven't prepared a slide, but I just thought I'd have a conversation. I've always said to everyone I'm an open book and always open to questions, and will answer them as best as I can. In many ways, I feel there was always this reluctance to step forward and speak of recovery when I'm a person who's 43 years old and have had a severe and enduring eating disorder for almost more than 30 years of my life. And I guess my concern around that has always been, I don't want you as parents and loved ones to think, oh my God, my child might have an eating disorder for 30 years, or, I might not be able to even look at recovery until 43 years down the line. But I can say that I consider where I am today as a place of privilege to be able to sit and have these really vulnerable conversations with people like yourselves. And I truly believe that in 43 years' time and 30 years' time, we won't even be talking about the diagnosis severe and enduring eating disorder. To give you a very brief understanding of my history, But then I'm also mindful not to go into too much detail, because I think all our stories are very different. And we all come from a very vulnerable place of wanting to compare with one another and wanting to say, wanting to see one person's story and resonate with that. And I all think we have shared messages. But my story might be very different to yours, but I can truly say that I think we all come from a place of understanding. My history has come from what they've diagnosed as severe and enduring anorexia nervosa, but then I've also been diagnosed with bulimia, and at a stage in my life, I had binge eating disorder as well. I had a major and significant relapse in my 20s because I don't think the eating disorder was ever addressed, or nor did we even know how to address the eating disorder in a supportive way. There was no such conversation as evidence-based treatment. Eating disorders were very much a choice, an addiction, if you will, something for me to just snap out of, if only. And I think also by that point, we looked at my eating disorder in terms of how I looked. So I think visually, if I presented well, people thought I was well. But the reality around an eating disorder is when I was in a much larger body, I would say I had the most vicious anorexia mindset that I could have ever thought was possible. So I think it was very much just went to show that my weight was certainly a health issue, but wasn't the most crucial start and the most violent part of my eating disorder. But sadly, I never was able to quite deal with the challenges around it, and it took over my life. And then life was consumed and revolved around it. And to the point where, yes, it did challenge my health. Significantly so. I've lost track of the amount of times that we've had conversations about my end of life. And yes, there were times where I was in the public health system, predominantly in the public health system, and very much caught up between the challenges of the mental health system and the medical health system, and not knowing, was this eating disorder that we spoke of a mental health issue or a health issue? And unfortunately, I got caught in the middle of what that debate was, as did my mother, who loved me very dearly at the time. Reflecting back on my experience, I think most of my involuntary treatments, and I am an advocate for involuntary treatment at times, because sometimes I think we have to sort of contain the eating disorder as best as we can. But unfortunately for me, majority of those experiences were very punitive and shaming. And I don't feel that any human being ever deserves the challenges around undignified treatment. But I can say that even in my darkest of hours, a turnaround and an approach to treatment in a compassionate way just shifted the way I started to think about myself, and how I started to view my eating disorder as a mental health issue and not a choice. And I think over time, I think it was these key messages that started to support me to hold on to hope. There isn't a one-stop answer that I have as to what has started to turn my life around. And can I be honest and say to everybody that there isn't a perfect picture. There isn't just quick solution. And sometimes I want to say to people here, take this pill and you will recover and all will be well. And say to fathers and mothers, yes, tell your child to take this pill. This is all you need to do and this will fix it. We all get things wrong and we don't do things perfectly. And I know my mother certainly didn't. But I do know that she loved me. And I think my mother, although she wasn't considered my carer as I became an adult, I learned over time that pushing her away to protect her from my eating disorder probably was the worst thing that I could do, because I don't think anyone can take away the love a parent has for their child, regardless of age. Sadly, I lost my mother as life did a 360, and she was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And many people actually thought it was my caring for her at end of life that shifted my road to recovery. It has just been a very important message in my life to say that she always held on to hope for me. It helped me to remember that we didn't know how to manage my eating disorder in the best way. We needed help, we needed support. I've needed a multidisciplinary team over time. But I think in itself, and I guess the key message that I would have to anybody is, I don't think there is a perfect picture that we can paint for any of us. But when you're looking at your child who has this eating disorder and all you can see is this eating disorder, acknowledge the fact that this is the hardest thing you're dealing with. You're dealing with this disease, with this illness that is challenging your child's health. It is affecting yourselves and your families. But at the end of the day, if you can see your child through that, and I believe you truly can, that you know that beyond that eating disorder is your child, I think there will always be a reason to hold on to hope. Because an eating disorder in itself is something that we can fully and completely recover from. For many of us, and for those that have had long and enduring histories, it's a work in progress. And I think for some of us, there are other co-occurring issues like myself with depression and anxiety and PTSD. These were things I need to heal with over time. But my recovery for me is knowing that I am not defined by my eating disorder. It is not my fault. It was not my mother's fault. It isn't anyone's fault. And I truly believe, and I will continuously advocate, that if we can have people to support us and hold us all as family, as friends, as loved ones, as a treatment team, to remain with grace, to hold on to dignity and integrity and support, and to say that no eating disorder should ever have power over how we live our lives and how we treat one another, but that we can always hold the barriers around the behaviors and the dangers that it can imply on our lives. Because at the end of the day, it has no power over any of us. And I think over time, we can heal. I have seen people fully recover, whatever that may look like for them. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think it is so true when we say that love does prevail. And yes, I do believe that recovery is possible. I believe that hope is possible. But I also believe that we can't do this on our own. And if we fall, then we need to get back up again. Until eventually, when we do get up, it's not as hard as it was the first time we fell. So I know there's not much time, Nikki, as I know that we've all got so much to share and say, but maybe the opportunity will be in any questions and answers that could potentially support the people that are here clearly holding on to hope for their loved ones as well.
Thank you, Shannon. As always, a wonderful message, inspiring message of hope and love and trust. I love that you have mentioned, as has what came through very, very clearly in Bronwyn's story and what Rod shared with us, the importance of those people in the individual's life who know them, who want their full recovery, who really want to be there beside them and just want to know how to do so. So really important message of what loved ones can do in that struggle and journey of recovery. I know that we've got a lot of questions that have come in, and I'm hoping, Gordon, that you're picking those up and may be able to pose them. Is that possible?
I will do my best. Something on a look. I want to be very respectful of the conversation we've just had, but I have to share something I saw in the chat panel. I think it was somebody referred to June's book, My Kid Is Back. There's been a bit of discussion around, well, what's a kid? So this is an Australian slang term. It is not a baby goat where we refer to it in Australia. The kid is our child. So we talk about our kids. They're our children, our issues, our offspring. That's was interesting. A couple of questions here. This has specifically been asked for Rod to answer, but others I'm sure will have a view. What does the parent do when clinicians won't go above 50%? We're talking about BMI here, and state above 50% is overweight or obese. And I noticed in the chat panel there was a lot of discussion around a lot of treatment centres not recognising the individual weight requirement of the person with the eating disorder and using these population averages, which I have to speak for myself. I find it extremely frustrating. It gets in the way of treatment often. But that's my opinion. I'll hand it over to the experts on the panel. Thank you.
Look, you're 100% right. It does occur. It occurs far too often. The reasons are simple, that there are not enough people who understand the true neurobiology of eating disorders. and there is a lot of, poor care that it's a major problem. And it becomes even more so when you have a situation of, limited choice. There are many things you can try. If you do have the option of, taking your toy and leaving the sandpit and going somewhere else, well, that's great. A lot of people don't have that. There is information that can be provided, etc. A lot of the people here within F.E.A.S.T, myself included, but others certainly are willing to be, involved as an advocate for, parents with treatment teams, etc. But it doesn't always work. Things do change. I think a lot of it comes down to just the way people's, what's the word I'm thinking of? I mean, just the psychology of how some groups work, etc. People, some groups get very caught up in what they do rather than what their outcomes are. I try to be very attached to outcomes rather than what I do, and I change what I do based on, the science as things evolve. I think it's a matter of getting people on your side, getting information on your side to do that. If possible, to get a support person who can come along with you to a clinical session or something like that, who can challenge things. There are many different ways to do it, but it's a hard one. But to me, the fact that parents so all over the world are able to take up the fight and supporting their young one to not only survive but to thrive, that they certainly have the resources to do things if there are the people there to help.
Thank you, Rod. Bronwyn or Shannon, do you want to add to that in any way?
We had an experience, speaking at least in part to that of just how damaging sometimes when someone gets to the 50th centile. I'm speaking to the converted here, but when someone hits the 50th centile, being told that you're weight restored really doesn't help anyone's mental health at all when they're already really struggling. It's a very unhelpful thing for anyone to be offered. But that, I think, more than anything is that you can still choose to keep on pushing and push past that, and pointing out to the team perhaps that being average in most things is not considered necessarily good. Everyone wants to be better than average, and same goes for keeping on working, going up.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, Shannon, anything to add? It's not compulsory, but just want to make sure you have the opportunity.
No, thank you so much. No, look, I think it's always a tricky conversation to have, but at the end of the day, weight and determining around weight is about finding that person who has enough knowledge, insight, and credentialing around treating eating disorders, that understands weight and meal maintenance, and that food is medicine, that it doesn't become the forefront of what determines where your child's at and what's most important, because at the end of the day, everybody is different, but at the same time, we can't be functioning when we are malnourished, and that's not always determined by weight and body side. It is purely through behaviours as well. So, and hopefully, there's always a team or a team member that has that understanding and insight behind that, if that's any help.
Thank you.
I'd just add that what Shannon says is very important, that it is the state you're aiming for, and that's the other thing you can be saying to a team. And they think, oh, we're restored. And I said, well, my kid hasn't changed. You haven't given me what's needed there. challenge them on that. And if they say that, well, the nutrition's not, doesn't make a difference in these things, you need to, be upfront and say, well, that's not what I'm told, what the world believes. Challenge them on it.
Thank you. There's another question that's come in. Is Nikki, perhaps you can direct who should answer this first. How do the panelists feel consumer lived experience can best be utilised within a clinic team?
That's a great question, and I think it is something that's happening increasingly, and I know that some of the clinics in Australia are really embracing it. And I don't want to determine who answers that first. I'd like anybody who's got an opinion about that to speak up.
Well, I'm happy to share it. I think it could be a fairly broad question, and I think it comes from there's several different angles that I think consumer or lived experience engagement in terms of supporting clinical teams is definitely stepping forward in eating disorders. When we look on a systemic level, I think including the lived experience voice in terms of policy and reform, I think we have a lot of people that are strong advocates and provide insight into that. When we're looking at, in terms of treatment, there is the wonderful ability of peer support and recovery coaches. I think this is a new and developing area that comes from both the carer and a consumer aspect. And then I think these are people that have had past living experiences of eating disorders and are there to walk alongside others as a complement to the clinical team. In terms of actually consumer voice within the clinical team while actively in treatment, I've always said that recovery wasn't doing to or for me, but with me. And I think that applies that there needs to be always a equal platform at the table where we're all able to engage in that conversation, but with very, very clear parameters around the eating disorder. So as much as the person of lived experience has a place at the table, the eating disorder does not, if that makes any sense. So in terms of engaging with the person as a consumer and carer, absolutely, but as the person and not the disorder.
I love the terminology that you used, Shannon, when you said people with lived experience supporting the clinical team. I love that framing. That's what those of us who are working in the area of support and advocacy are putting ourselves forward to do, those with the lived experience as affected individuals and carers. And it's happening increasingly. Bronwyn, did you have something that you would like to say about that?
Well, I know, as you said, in Australia there's definitely an increasing clinical carers being involved in the team. Certainly the team that my daughter was under now has a carer support sitting within the system as part of the treatment team. And I think that would have been really helpful in terms of having someone who is coming from within the care team who truly gets the carer point of view. I think very much it always felt for caring for my daughter that although they were supporting treatment to some degree, it was very much, I always felt there was a little bit of myself against the team. I was advocating for my daughter, I was advocating for her care, but it never felt that it was really, we were all rowing in the same direction. It often felt that we were pulling in different ways, and having someone who's actually coming from a carer perspective would actually help everyone be pulling in the same direction rather than just pulling each other apart. Certainly peer support, I think, is incredibly important when it comes to caring for eating disorders. I found F.E.A.S.T when my daughter had been ill around about 6 months or so. And certainly they've been very foundational in sort of giving me the support to keep on going when things were looking pretty grim for a long time.
Yes, same here. The support, information, advice, just companionship that I received from peers, from other parents going through what we were going through as a family through F.E.A.S.T, and the F.E.A.S.T forums was absolutely fundamental in our daughter's recovery, our ability to support her to recover with the peer support that we received. So that lived experience input hugely valuable. Rod, what's your view of the role of people with lived experience on the treatment team?
I think it's very important. That the biggest obstacle I see is the attitude of the team. If teams are still thinking in terms of, well, parents cause eating disorders, or other attitudes like that, then they won't think of it. I think it's not essential, but if you don't have it there, you need to have very much, people who are very much on the side of carers and of the patients, who can be truly, empathetic with them, who put out vast amounts of information to them. I've been in a situation where I'm often having to do things as a team of one, and I put enormous amount of effort, particularly early on, in giving information to parents, providing them with resources, giving them books and things like that on CDs, and encouraging them to look at different information as well, because I might say something in a particular way and it just doesn't gel with them. They can see it, read it written by someone else or a video by someone else, and it will gel. It's just one of those things that I think will continue to evolve and happen more and more. But I think the biggest obstacle to it is just, the attitude of teams, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Nikki, can I just add as well, which is very much in terms of attitude, and I think it's an important thing to just consider as well, is that one of the promising things, and I'm seeing this happen internationally as well as nationally, that people are starting to become more confident in engaging with people of lived experience. Sometimes it's more challenging in terms of an active treatment. But I've noticed that in resources, documentation, actual further development processes and treatment resources, accesses to treatment are actually being utilized where lived experience input is being added into that. So there's a form of a co-design and a co-production process in this, where it sort of has to be done alongside people with a lived experience. And I think that's a promising reflection that clinicians are starting to truly value the lived experience input as well. So look, it's certainly a work in progress, but it's far better than when no voice was ever used at all.
Yeah, thank you.
There's still a lot of stigma, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's a lot of stigma and misunderstanding, and I think that's something that we haven't actually named, but is just sort of popping up and disappearing again in a lot of the discussions that we've had all day, in that we are feeling that a lot of the care that we are accessing and the medical professionals who perhaps are available to treat eating disorders often don't have the level of education and awareness and understanding that they need and deserve. And that's an issue, and people don't know what they don't know, and that does not, the people that we've had here today speaking are an absolute exception, but and probably most people who are attending the conference, the F.E.A.S.T conference, are coming because they want to learn more. They are keen to know more about the latest in knowledge of eating disorders and their treatment. But there are so many people out there, particularly at primary health level and so on, who just don't have the knowledge that is required for people to have that early diagnosis and effective evidence-based treatment. It's an issue. It's something that we need to be addressing, and just naming that now, because that's where the stigma comes from. It's where the people going down the wrong pathway comes from, and so on. But yeah, just mentioning that, really. Another question, Gordon.
Yeah, and we'll probably have to finish on this one. I'm going to combine two questions into one. I like the idea of a recovery coach. Where do you have that, and what do they do? And the second part of that is, are there any recovery coaches in Sydney? So in terms of how we answer that, I'm very conscious our panel are all here are in Australia and New Zealand. So within whatever context you have, can you guys help out our attendees with that, please?
Who's got something to offer on that question?
I'm happy to just offer some brief information because there's a lot to share in that. So to give you an understanding, the best definition of recovery coaches are those that have utilised Carolyn Costin's coaching, who she's developed an amazing program to support those who are either wanting to become recovery coaches or have had a lived experience of an eating disorder. It's quite an extensive coaching program. It's worth Googling that and just finding out a bit more. Whether there's actually a directory to say specifically where these coaches are, because it's an international program, it's worth sourcing that, and I'm sure there'll be a form of contact there that could guide you towards who is a recovery coach in different states or countries. I would strongly recommend that if you're looking at a recovery coach, that it has been someone that's gone through coaching and training that is recognised. And by that, I also acknowledge peer support. So peer support in terms of there is mental health peer support, which is a different form of support, but very much a walking alongside from a lived experience. Again, I would certainly advocate that any form of peer support is done with those that have had training and guidance, and that seek supervision and support themselves. So these are very much people that have actually had training and counselling and support around how to best manage and walk alongside someone with a lived experience from their own lived experience as well. How to find these people, again, it's worth looking up, but I would go to Carolyn Costin's first and foremost. And most peer support programs are implemented through local eating disorder services, whether it's statewide or whether it's a non-government organisation within your country as well. So if that's helpful, that's my understanding.
Bronwyn, thanks, Shannon.
The other version of coaching, of course, is also of coaching parents and carers, and that's if you've got a very good sort of F.E.A.S.T system, a lot of that comes through from that. But where there isn't that, it can be certainly augmented or replaced by parents and carers who, again, that are trained to do that, and as through the around the dinner table and the moderators there with F.E.A.S.T. But there are some private ones I know in the US. I'm not sure. And I think they're developing them also in Melbourne and Sydney, but there's still not a lot around.
Just a comment here from the chat panel has been quite busy on this topic as well. In Victoria and Queensland, there are peer mentoring programs run by Eating Disorders Victoria and Eating Disorders Queensland respectively, is in the chat panel. I know in Western Australia there are in-reach peer support programs in Perth Children's Hospital, one of the private hospitals, and an organisation called Women's Health Works. From a parochial Western Australian point of view, I've started to advocate around the provision of outreach peer support programs like EDV and EDQ are offering in their states. So I think it's a terrific support to the whole treatment approach for the person with the disorder and their carers. Okay, Nikki, back to you.
Yeah, I know that we need to finish up, but I just want to say thank you very much to the three people who have been so generous, particularly with your personal stories, Shannon and Bronwyn, and thank you so much for sharing those and being so vulnerable and providing that real life evidence of recovery is just so helpful to people. And thank you, Rod, for your fantastic, succinct, to the point advice as well that people have mentioned in the comments. Really enjoyed that. And I think just to summarise, what has come through from everybody is the important role that families and particularly parents can play in holding the light, in holding that light of recovery as possible. And often we will have to say, look, fake it until you make it. If you at times you just might feel so desperate. Just believe that recovery is possible and that a full return to a wonderful life is there. and you can support your loved one through at whatever time, however long the person has been unwell, for whatever age they are. We see that evidence again and again. So thank you, everybody. And we'll hand back to you for more sessions. That was not the final session. Sorry about that. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for the panel. Again, it is always a heart-moving segment, this one, and you guys have made it that way again, and that's its power. So we thank you for that.